Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of Western Governors University College of IT Data Analytics Fireside Chats. It's great to be with you all this Wednesday evening. I'm absolutely thrilled to have an amazing guest on the Fireside Chat this week for our session, which is all about revving up with analytics. Just a little bit of a play on words as you'll hear in a second. So I'm pleased to welcome Kamal Distal, who's with us. And Kamal is a passionate, visionary, and inclusive global leader in data, IT, and cybersecurity. She excels at building teams to solve the most complex challenges. And through her experience, she's enabled a culture that really empowers teams to bring their best self and deliver value. And she really embodies true modern leadership around transformational technologies and human-centered designs. She serves as the VP of Data Analysis, Platforms, and Data Science, owning end-to-end data and decision intelligence strategy and execution for Toyota Lexus. Before that, she was a Senior Director for Global Retail Markets Data Office at Liberty Mutual for 7 years, where she owned strategy and execution of enterprise-wide utilization of data as an asset. She also supported and developed a team supporting $35 billion in business. She has degrees from Harvard University and New England College. She has a passion for volunteer work with Maine Adaptive Sports and Recreation. And of course, she is one of us, an analytics, Kool-Aid drinker who loves data, loves the math, loves the technology, and loves the soft skills that go with it. And I'm so happy to welcome Kamal to the Fireside Chat tonight. Good evening.
Oh, thank you so very much, Joe. I'm honored and privileged, and it's more of a humble leader. So hearing all of those things about myself sometimes is, daunting, as well as I'm really excited to share my journey with you, answer questions, make sure that this is something that we can get value out of together. So I'm honored, and I'm delighted to be here, and delighted to be speaking with you all today.
Thank you. So as we start to dive into the conversation, and again, we have some students from Western Governors that are on, we have some alumni, we have some friends and family that may have come on through LinkedIn and through some of our strategic partnerships. I'm sure they'd love to start with just an understanding of what analytics means to you. And as we had chatted about last week when we were connecting, everybody's got a slightly different definition of it. And I'm kind of curious when you're thinking about that, also, has it changed over time?
Sure. So let me start by saying a few things in terms of where my passion is, and I think Joe hit that. And the reason I'm going to talk about some of those passion areas is because you'll see those themes all the way through my career, and then through some of the questions, right, that we're going to be talking about today. So overall, I'm a data person by heart, right? And what that means is I've spent a ton of time both on the IT side and then on the business side of many different industries, really focused on how do you deliver value with data, right? So when you're asking me the question of like, what's the definition of analytics? The definition of analytics is really how to get insights out of data in many different ways, right? Using many different forms, technologies, algorithms, to be able to then answer a question, right? But to be able to answer that question very quickly, because today we don't have the time, right, to do major amounts of analytics and so forth. So now with technologies, right, the goal is answer questions and deliver value. And that's really it. The rest of sort of my career has been around making sure that I'm focused on IT and infrastructure and technologies, right? So data, IT infrastructure, and then cyber. And cyber really focuses on analytics in many different ways, right? How do you assess threats? How do you determine proactively, predictively, what our cyber threat actors are going to be doing, or threat actors are going to be doing? So each one of those areas and themes, right, really focuses on getting to insight very quickly. And then the last piece, the way I'll answer that question is something that's really close to my heart, which you touched on, is my husband and I are avid volunteers with an organization called Maine Adaptive or New England Adaptive. And their mission is really to bring anybody who has an inability, and we don't say disability because I think it's an inability, to the outdoors. So in the wintertime, we do the adaptive ski program or the blind ski program. And if you ever really want to think about how to utilize technology and data and many other aspects, right? Try to see a blind person um, go down a mountain, right? And you're responsible for their safety and making sure that you're guiding them. And then in the summertime, we do a ton with the adaptive program as well, with mountain biking and hiking. So my long-winded answer really is each one of those areas and each one of those spaces is really about data analytics, decision intelligence, and getting to value much faster, right? So you can answer those questions and then, really make the business successful, right? Of whatever it is, the industry you're in.
I love hearing about Maine Adaptive, the New England Adaptive, and the work that you're doing there. And I feel like we should connect again on that in the future. I'd love to see if there's ways that we as a community can get more involved in that program. It sounds wonderful.
I'd love it.
I also love how you talked about value as part of that definition of analytics and that explanation. And in my experience over the years, and for those of you that don't know me, I've spent about 11 years between EMC and Dell Technologies. It seems that a lot of analytics teams, data science teams, struggle with getting to that final step of being able to show value or show measurable value. Why do you think that is? Is there some common symptom that's preventing these teams from getting to that value delivery, or is it something else?
Yeah, great question, right? Even today, as I was meeting with some of our senior leaders with, accounting and finance and many other leaders, I think what I've realized is value means different things to different people, right? So sometimes it's efficiency, sometimes it's direct cost savings, sometimes it's return on investment. And some of these things we get very lost in how to calculate, what's the best calculation and so forth. And I think what I've learned, right, is you can either get caught up in all of the details and is it a perfect calculation or not, because there will be somebody who will say, well, I don't agree with that for this and that reason, or I don't agree with that for this and that reason. My I'm an extreme measurement oriented person, right? So my team sometimes is really kind of sick of me saying, how would you measure this? And how would you actually say, show me what good looks like? So at the end of the day, you have to qualify what value means for a particular initiative, right? So put down the statement, and I always say, what's the so what of the initiative? So what you're doing, some of that work. And even when you start with those statements, then it allows you to qualify and quantify, right? To
Hmm.
say, okay, here are the soft benefits, and then here are the hard benefits. And people get so caught up in the definitions of all of these things that they forget that at the end of the day, what somebody's really looking for is your justification, right? Why should you do this initiative? And then what do I get out of it? So that's really sort of how I've dealt with this. I don't have a magic answer. I've probably struggled with it in every industry. But I think what we've learned is you have to put this out there in terms of soft benefits and hard benefits, and then really start working down your way, right? To say, okay, how do I make this more tangible?
So there's so much spinning in my head right now with that answer, but the two words that you said, so what, are so important. And I think if I could even extend it a little bit further, it's also looking at that from different perspectives, right? So whether it's a certain stakeholder group or your boss or your boss's boss or your teammates, everyone may have a slightly different flavor of what that so what means. But I think back to the teams I've worked with, the teams I've consulted with, those two words are so important. And, I would encourage every student, every alumni, every professional that are on the call, put a little post-it note on your screen on your computer and ask that question. So what? Why am I doing this? And how to tie it back? I love that. I think that's great advice. There was also something that kind of came to my mind too when you were talking about people being quick to disagree potentially or having these competing definitions. Are there potential skill sets that would be important to folks going into these teams to handle that, especially when it's on the fly or when you might be in a stakeholder meeting and they start throwing those curveballs?
Yeah. I'm speaking to the analytics group, right? So I
Yes.
think this is the right group of the future. So all the skills that you all are learning, right? And Joe and I've talked quite a bit through the program itself. you- I think the program is actually equipping you for exactly those moments, right? When you're sitting in front of stakeholders or senior leaders, and they may be throwing darts at you to say, well, how did you calculate this, and why is this a this value, and why is this XYZ million? I think what I would do is my advice would be prepare a little bit, right? And put it into a couple of different categories. Soft benefits, hard benefits. And even that can be gray sometimes, right? So as long as you have those categories, I think it's okay to say, hey, here's how I'm interpreting this. Here's sort of, how we pull this together. Here's who it was validated by. So another piece of advice is generally get your accounting and finance team on your side so that when you're going in, right, they're backing you up with, hey, we vetted through these numbers, and they're going to have their own definitions, by the way. So that's really how I've worked on, making sure that when I'm in some of these sessions, that the pitch and the picture looks clean. But it never really does. I've always come out with more work sometimes as I go into these sessions. So give it a try. It's quantifiable and non-quantifiable benefits, and then really be able to speak to those and get your finance and accounting team, on your side.
There's some real gold nuggets in that response. I really appreciate, finding allies and collaborations with other groups. So whether it's finance, a business partner team, perhaps, or maybe a key influencer in the team that you're trying to influence, being able to do pre-wires with a lot of those folks as well. And I think there's also a mental component of this about going into some of these meetings knowing that there will be a curveball thrown at some point, and it may not come from the person that you think. And that's okay. And that actually generates conversation. It builds trust as you start debating and explaining. And it helps you to be more agile and to think on your toes. And I always look for these conversations, by the way, for an opportunity to recommend improv comedy training to students and to folks that are listening. And for those of you that have never heard me talk about that before, I could talk all night about it. But it's basically whose line is it anyway? Like you'd see on ABC or go on YouTube, tonight, and you can watch some clips of it. But it's everything being made up on the spot, and it teaches you to go with whatever's being said from the people around you and being okay with that, and then saying yes and, so acknowledging it and building it, but not going in expecting to be scripted and assuming that everything's going to go perfectly. But again, as Kamal said, having those tips around, having those allies, thinking through the different scenarios, having the hard and soft benefits thought out, maybe practicing with your team. There's a lot you can do to prepare for those scenarios. And then perhaps you take some improv comedy training as well, too.
I love it. Actually, that's really sound advice, right? Because over the years, often think like, how did I actually develop this skill? And I actually debated a lot when I was younger, in college and so forth. So I was on the debate team. And I think those skills really helped me kind of really think on the fly and then make my point. One advice would be don't fudge if you don't know. Just say, hey, you know what? Let me get back to you on
Mhm.
that. Or here's what I do know, and I'll be back. Because I think once you start to throw out some numbers and so forth, right, guess what? They're going to hold you accountable to it. So those are all some lessons learned, from my career at least.
There's a question that just popped up in the chat that maybe before we go on, we can just sidetrack for a second. Could you explain what you mean to the audience, the difference between soft skills and soft benefits and hard benefits?
Sure. So soft benefits are things that sometimes are hard to measure, right? Off the top of my head, sort of some examples would be, hey, one FTE does X, Y, and Z, and spends hours and hours on this. Sometimes you may be able to calculate that. But sometimes you may not be truly be able to calculate, hey, how much time was the person spending on a particular task, right? And let's say you've automated that task. Now you've taken out, some time out of that person's schedule. So while you can actually say, hey, we shaved off, 8 hours or 20 hours or whatever it may be by doing some automation, as an employee, right, that is something that is, we call it a sunk cost, right? It's a horrible way of describing it. But at the same time, that employee is not going anywhere, right? What we're going to do is take the time that was saved and repurpose, those skills to doing other things. So those are generally called soft benefits, primarily because accounting and finance in the book of business, right? They'll never say, oh, I see, like, yeah, this is, this is a line item in the budget that we can take out or whatever have you. Hard benefits are where you are really working on revenue generation, for example, and they're hard dollars, right? Where you've partnered with the accounting and finance team to say, if I do this initiative, it's a $5 million initiative, and here's how we've calculated the $5 million, and it's true revenue generation or true cost savings, right? And so it actually hits the books and the budget accordingly. So those are hard benefits. So those are the kind of classifications. And what I can do is send Joe afterwards, a few sort of things I've put together in my life in terms of how to quantify what's a soft benefit and what's a hard benefit. So I can share some of those things later on.
I think we just need to bring you in as a professor and we'll just kind of go with that.
I'm happy to.
I think the one thing for the folks that are listening to that goes back to that value creation and why sometimes getting to that value piece is so hard is those soft benefits can sometimes be very difficult to prove unless you have some kind of a controlled experiment where you have, for example, one sales division that may be deploying a particular analysis or model and another sales division that isn't. And assuming those two sales divisions looked and behaved somewhat similarly before, you can start to infer, okay, well, by doing A, B, and C with this machine learning model, we've been able to see this result, which means that the salesperson may be spending more time with customers than they have in the past. Or you could potentially do some time and motion studies where you're actually measuring where people are doing throughout the day across a sample. Those become a lot more difficult than saying this is the amount of dollars that have come in or the amount of costs that I've cut out. And a lot of analytics projects are heavy on those soft benefits, which is not a bad thing, right? That's how you change the way people work and how you transform businesses. But that's often one of the reasons why these struggles pop out, and also where decision intelligence and decision intelligence workflows can start to come in to help you to find ways to be able to prove that those benefits actually happened.
You're spot on. I think I've never been in a presentation to senior leaders where I have not created at least those two categories, right? And I think there's a third one too. I'll look up, you know, but generally it's, operational type benefits, employee benefits, those types of things, employee satisfaction, right? It never has dollars associated with it. But I think if you've taken out a whole bunch of waste from some process that folks were doing, that means a lot, right? That actually helps with productivity, that helps with doing other things. So yeah, it may not have a dollar value directly correlated, but imagine if you weren't actually sharing some of those details and information, right, with senior leaders. So always have those categories so that they can understand that it's not always about the dollars, right? It's about many other components, both soft and hard.
Well said. I feel like we should hit an applause button for that.
I've had amazing mentors who've taught me all of this, right? And also have experiential analysis by going in and presenting and then getting a ton of feedback. So lessons learned.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd love to transition a little bit to Toyota for a second. I know a lot of the folks that are listening are excited that you're with a company that they recognize and they love. Personally, I've had a Camry, I've had a RAV4. Toyota has been a big part of my family over the years. Could you talk a little bit about what analytics looks like at Toyota and maybe some of the high-level initiatives your team's working on?
Great. So analytics comes in many different flavors at Toyota. Toyota is a very, very large organization. So as I've come on board, really what I'm starting to do is establish all the different practices, establish the analytics practice. I just kicked off the last year as I came on board, the Office of Data Science and Automation. So it's ODSA. That's heavily focused on data science, decision intelligence, and AI. And then the analytics practice, right? It's really about making sure that, as I said, right, the goal is to get to insight quickly, fast, and then making sure that all the business units, right, how they run their business, that information is always available to them. So we have various levels of maturity depending on which business unit you're talking to. I actually just came from some of our part centers, meeting with all the different teams to say, hey, what are some things that are working from an analytics perspective? What information are you not getting, right? And what questions are you not able to answer about how the business works and how the business runs? I don't say, hey, tell me what your data strategy is, right? Because that means nothing to them, right? And so what I always say is, and I ask the leaders this as well, tell me what things about the business, what questions about the business, are you not able to answer today? And what are some of the problems that you're trying to solve? Very different way of framing it, because now they can speak to what their challenges and problems are. And then we as a team can back into that, right? To say, okay, what data do we need? How do we enable decision making for them, et cetera? So to truly answer your question, right, we're in sort of different stages of maturity across
Mm.
different domains. And my goal here, and one of my aspirations here, is really to make sure that I simplify our technology and data stack so that the business teams can come and access all the data and information they need without a lot of input from folks, right? And then they can make decisions. And then when it is that the data gets really confusing or they don't understand it, right, there's a mechanism to provide that feedback back. So my team is constantly churning and working through how to clarify, some of their questions and needs. Are we all the way there? No, I don't think I've ever really worked for an organization that's all the way there. But there are some amazing ways and methods, and it's not just about tools, right? Because IT folks always think like tools are going to solve all your problems. It's not. It's about the tools, the process, and how you really set up the data and the data pipelines so that the business can get to information much faster. So look to a lot of amazing things that we're going to do over the coming years, right, to shape and transform, right, how we do data and analytics here.
That's very exciting. And again, so many gold nuggets in that response, Kamal. And in particular, the one thing that's really standing out in my mind is this whole notion of partnership. And you talked about sitting with the business and listening to them, listening about their problems, and then being able to digest that to figure out where data and analytics and data science can come from. And I think one piece of advice I used to give folks that were new when I was at Dell was that you're not always going to have these projects that are going to come across your desk, and there's just not this constant funnel of here's a data science request, here's a data science request, here's a data science request. And so often it's actually going to sit with people in the business and just listening to what their struggles are and where there may be inefficiencies and observing and watching. And then being able to take that back and say, okay, well, is this something that analytics can solve for? Is this something that data can solve for? And being able to put a pitch and a play together for that. So if I could, what's the role of that business partnership in what you just talked about?
Yeah. It's actually really data product ownership,
Okay.
right? So the role, and this is something
Mhm.
that I'm creating here. Um, the role of a data product owner is really to make sure that they are that liaison, right, with the business product owner or whatever roles the business has. And that mission is really to synthesize and understand all of those problems and challenges. And then remember, across a data team, right, there are different types of roles as well. So some are platform oriented roles, right? Some are data engineering leader roles, data management and governance type roles. So that product owner, the data product owner, really works across the board, right, with the team to be able to say, hey, here's the value prop, right? Here's the opportunity statement in domain ABC, right? And so building that portfolio of opportunities is what the product owner does. Data science is a little bit tricky. So we have a chief data scientist, right, who works alongside myself, and we really go alongside the product owner to the business
Mhm.
to be able to understand, what are those problems? Because not every product owner knows that entire discipline, right? And can synthesize as you're talking about, like, is this an analytics problem? Is it a data science problem? So that partnership of the product owner and then, of course, sort of the data
Mhm.
science person allows us to cover that gamut of, okay, should I go this lane and it's a data problem or analytics problem? Do I go this lane? Is it an AI, generative AI? Those are all the buzzwords that are happening right now, or just pure data science, right? So that's how we are
Mhm.
trying to orchestrate some of this to make sure that it's not this like every single person has to know everything about everything, right? It's not even feasible or possible. And then it keeps things clean because then the data product owner really manages the portfolio, right? So when we have questions of like, what do I need to do here? Or what are the focus areas? Or what are the priorities? There's one person that actually is managing that for a particular domain or a cross-cutting initiative. That's how we've structured it.
I love that. And I love the fact that it's also really helping to bring to life the fact there's a lot of roles that exist within these functions. It's not all about the data scientist. It's not all about the data engineer. It's not all about, in this case, the data product owner. It's a combination of all these efforts and really coming together as a team sport.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. I'll connect with you in a
please do.
few months and see how this is going, right? We've had product owners in sort of the other organizations that I've worked in, and here we're starting this up. So I have lots of lessons learned, but also it's exciting, right? Because every industry has its little nuances. So I'll certainly connect back up with you.
Oh, I would love that. And it's been really exciting to hear about these product management roles within analytics that have been emerging, like this one that you're describing. And I'm kind of curious because you also mentioned business processes before too. And one aspect that usually goes in a lot of these product or project manager roles is process engineering to some way. And I believe you're a Six Sigma black belt as well, right?
I am.
So I'm curious, how do some of the principles that come from Six Sigma and process engineering start to play into this then?
Yeah, I think my simple answer is this. Like, I remember as I was going through my certification, right? And really, it was a combination of Six Sigma, which is all pure measurement, measure, right? And then the lean part of it is improvement, right? So how they play into all of this is exactly what I said, right? If
Hmm.
you can gather all of the opportunity areas, but remember, the next thing is really what is the value prop? So if you can't assign a value prop and measure what it is that you're going to get out of the initiative, don't bother, right? Because at some point or another, somebody's going to come down and scrutinize all of this, right? And say, well, why did you do this? And why did you start this? And as rightfully so, they should, because we have to have a lot more of that rigor to be able to say, hey, we are making data driven decisions, right? Not just gut check type things. But there are some things that are more innovation oriented where you kind of have to say, hey, I have a hypothesis. I'm just going to go out and try it and we'll figure it out, right? So to answer your question on sort of how it all fits together, it's really about understanding the problem statement, right?
Hmm.
And it doesn't matter whether you use Lean, Six Sigma, and being able to articulate what the value measurement is, right? And what is the problem statement even? What is the hypothesis? And how am I, in my analysis, whatever techniques I use, am I going to determine, is that hypothesis a good hypothesis? Is that a true hypothesis? Did I prove it out? How did I prove it out? And that's all the measurement piece, which is all the Six Sigma stuff. So I I I don't know how else to think and function, right? Because I my brain is just always wired that way. Because at the end of the day, right, you have to be able to say, yes, this was successful and this was successful because the so what, right? So if you have to really put that method and rigor into it.
Yeah, I think that paints a great picture for the folks on the line right now too. And in terms of, it's not just about the data, it's not just about the analysis that you're doing or getting an accurate model or an accurate algorithm. There's a lot more that needs to come together to really get to that value generation, being able to measure it, being able to tell that story at the end of the day, which is one of the reasons why all these different roles are emerging under the analytics umbrella, which is an exciting time for our students and our graduates and our alumni. I'm curious though. So we talked a little bit about Toyota and your existing experience, but you've also crossed a lot of industries as well too. Um, in particular, you are at Liberty Mutual, so now you're talking about something that was in the insurance space, right? So how does this start to play together? What's similar between Toyota and some of these other roles that you've had? What may be different? Or does the fact that you're in different industries really even matter?
Great question. So I get this question a lot. And then the second question I generally get is, how in the world did you actually go from a completely different industry? So I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in transportation, I've worked in digital data, I've consulted. So how did you switch, right? And generally it's like people have this fear of like, am I going to be successful? Am I not going to be successful? So as Joe and I were talking, I said, look, at the end of the day, the skill that you all need to develop, right, is somebody should be able to drop you on an island, right, and you should be able to survive, and maybe even come out, richer than you were before. So that skill, right, is the most important skill to be able to say, I can be in any industry, and I know methodically how to start to think about where to find the appropriate nuggets, who I need to partner with, where are all the problem statements, right? How do I go about actually working towards some things that are quick hits, some things that are more strategic and medium oriented, some things that are much larger scale that I need to go after. So uh, the other thing that my mentors always said, and I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan as well. And he's got this book around the infinite game, right? And there's some courses there as well. And I've taken several. And really, what struck me was one of the instructors that was teaching said, I was a gardener 6 years ago, and never did I ever think that I would be teaching at the Simon Sinek Academy, right? Some of these courses. So oftentimes we put a lot of constraints on ourselves rather than really saying, hey, you know what? I think I can do this. And, I have to be able to, figure out and fail fast and all these words that we use, right? We have to practice them. So I'm fearless anyways. And as I was making, the shifts in my career, absolutely, I had this like knot in my stomach, like, am I doing the right thing? Will I be able to survive? But at the same time, my core training, right, my core thought process of how to develop my analytical brain really gave me a lot of confidence in terms of I can go out and solve any problem or any challenge anywhere, right, in any industry. And what I also learned, this is going to sound really silly, but I'd given myself a challenge, right? And I said, hey, I think I'm going to try to work in as many industries as I can because as I started to, to get experience in different industries, again, staying with the domains, right? Data is my domain,
Hmm.
IT and infrastructure and decision intelligence is my domain, and cybersecurity is my domain. So I've always stayed with those domains, no matter what industry. But I started to realize that there are so many commonalities, and everybody used to say, well, no, I'm different and my data is different. It's actually not the case. The context of the data is different, right? The terminology may be different. But at the same time, if you really think through what Joe and team are preparing you for is how to think about data and analytics and how to think about problem solving, I think you could do anything. And so my mission is, as I've built my career to be able to say, oh, in that industry, in healthcare, guess what? This is what I learned, right? And so I can port that over into this other industry where the problem set is exactly the same. Or, oh, I see the context over here is quite different. So how would I go about solving for that, et cetera? So I don't put those constraints on myself, anymore. Early on in my career, I was quite scared as well. But I think you have to be bold, right? And you have to say, okay, I'm willing to take this risk and nothing bad is actually going to happen. Believe it or not, I think you will succeed. So you have to have that confidence in yourself.
That's really inspirational. I love that message so much. And, I personally can relate to so much of that. Before I got into analytics, I was a bartender, I was a waiter, I worked in lawn and garden at Sears, which, by the way, if you see me out in my yard, you know that I don't belong in lawn and garden. Um, and, if you have that way of thinking, you have the analytical mind, you understand that thought process. It's amazing that what you can do. And my academic training was primarily in marketing. And I've actually never worked, as I think I mentioned to you last week, I've never worked in marketing before. I went into analytics and sales, I went into analytics and finance, I went into analytics and supply chain. And I was able to use 90% of the skills in that thought process throughout each one. And then you pick up the context to your point, the domain piece that you need. You build your new networks and you figure out how to survive on that variation of the island. And it's a great example with the surviving on the island that you talked about. But for all the students that are thinking about how do I prepare for a particular industry or sector, as long as you've mastered the way that you think through these problems and you've mastered how you tell the story and how you form these business partnerships, you'll pick up the context. You'll find people to support you in your network. You'll figure out that variation of the problem. But you already have so many of the tools that you need to be successful, regardless of whether you're in healthcare or you're in tech, like a company like Dell, or you're in a company like Toyota, and you're actually working in automobiles. You have so many of those skills already.
I think really well said, right? I think oftentimes, as I say, I think we put those constraints on ourselves. So you just kind of have to be bold and say, okay, I'm going to do this. And the good part, about what Joe said is there are going to be a lot of people in those domains that have been there who have a ton of experience, right? So you may feel like the new person on the block, but at the same time, you can rely on them for that context. Whereas what you're coming with is fresh skills, how to think about data, how to solve problems with analytics, right? That they may or may not have. So that can become a really strong partnership. And that's what I've used here, with our partners to say, hey, you bring the context, you know the business better than I do, but I know data and information, right? So let's get after this and be successful together.
There's three letters that just popped in my head. SME, a SME, a subject matter expert. Whenever you are in a new company, in a new team, in a new domain, in a new industry, in a new vertical, whatever it is, find a SME to buddy up with. Send that person a fruit basket, put them on the holiday list, go to their kids' birthday parties. They understand the ins and outs. They know where the bodies are buried. They know what skeletons are in the closet. They're the person that's going to add context to so much of this. And again, it goes back into that partnership, that networking, and really playing the fact that analytics is a people sport, a people thing. So, team, really quick, as you're listening to this, we're getting close to the Q&A portion of the Night with Kamal as well. So you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx webinar, there's a little button there that says Q&A. This is your opportunity to start thinking about what you'd like to ask Kamal about her experience, about what's happening at Toyota, about career pathings, things like that. So if you want to throw those questions in, we'll be getting to that in just a few minutes. Again, it's the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see that Q&A button. So I love at this point to flip a little bit to the challenges that your team faces today. And as you mentioned, no company has kind of figured out the Rosetta Stone of everything that is data and analytics. But what are some of the challenges that you and your team are thinking about?
Yeah, where do I start? I think there are many challenges, right? So I'll speak to a few that sort of have risen to the top. One is really helping folks understand the power of data, right? And the power of an information asset, right? Because an information
Mhm.
asset is data. So when you go and speak to leaders and you say, hey, what is your data strategy or what is our data strategy? They really have generally no idea what you're talking about, right? Unless they have background in data or they've had the ability to partner with, extreme data people and so forth. So one of the core challenge is how to help the business see and understand the power of data and information and how you can help them solve their problems, right? The second is really our data assets are distributed all over the place. And I'm sure, there'll be folks that are to the extreme right, which is, pull all your data to one central place. There are organizations that have done that very successfully. And then there are some that are like, hey, we have a distributed model, so we're going to virtualize and go about it this way or that way. But the problem is, even if you do that, right, you still have to make sure that the data is appropriately cleaned. There isn't all kinds of dirtiness, right? There's definition, there's understanding, all of that and more. So how to set up a really good data management and governance program that allows you to move through those pieces in a much more accelerated way. And then there's some technologies now that was just fabulous, right, that can help you accelerate that. So backing up, helping the business understand, right, what exactly does it mean to do data, right? Second is, do we have the appropriate technology stack, pipelines, right, and the data definitions so that you're not spending a ton of time cleaning all of this information, right? And then the third is really, there's always budget, right? Where we've worked, it's like, how do you secure budget? How do you make sure that, you're showing the value of data, et cetera? And so there, again, what we talked about earlier is measurement, right? Show the benefits every time. There should always be a slide somewhere. Soft benefits, hard benefits, what you know, right? And so that allows you to kind of make sure that you're continuously, fighting the fight of budgets and so forth, right? To say, hey, if you don't give me X, I'm not able to
Mhm.
deliver Y. I can't deliver this value. I can go on, right? I think we have many, many challenges. But I think at the end of the day, the fourth one I'll talk about is talent. We're always strapped for talent. And so, how to bring about the folks that are in the organization, right? And make sure that you can kind of move on a data literacy journey so that they have a career path, they understand what's happening. So I've just launched a program, which is an immersive program where we're kind of doing a hybrid of, some coursework and
Mhm.
then a lab with me personally to be able to say, okay, how do we start talking data, right? How do we start talking problem statements and how do we start talking about solutions to particular problem statements. And every organization is different. They launch different types of programs. So literacy is critical, right? Because if everybody doesn't speak the language of data and you're not making a push towards that, I think you're going to have a really hard time from an overall, North Star perspective.
Yeah, the first thing that pops in my mind when you're talking about that too is the culture. And you have a lot of companies that claim to be data driven from their culture perspective, for example, or data first. But so much of what you're talking about is really that thought process and in appreciating and understanding what data can really do to move the needle and transform the business.
Right.
I'm curious though, the other thing that popped in my head, and this will be my last question before we go to Q&A. So again, to the folks listening, this is your chance. Go pop things in the Q&A window. So much of what you were talking about sounds like a fireside chat episode we had not so long ago, where we had two entrepreneurs from Savant Labs on talking about creating analytics companies and what the entrepreneurship journey is. When I talk about entrepreneurship here, does that resonate with you? Like, do you feel in a lot of ways, like in your roles in analytics, that you've been an entrepreneur within the companies you've worked in?
I'm an entrepreneur by heart, right? So I never really take the status quo, I'll say. I'm always kind of pushing the buttons and the envelope in terms of how do you do this differently? How can you do this bigger, better, faster? How are other ways to solve this particular problem, right? Things we may not even have. And that's why I love some of my work with the adaptive community because there's no standard recipe, right? It's not, no one individual fits the exact same profile as another individual. So you have to troubleshoot and you have to figure out, okay, what are the data points? How do I make sure that this person is comfortable that they can use the, whatever mechanism that they're using, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you have, when you're in this space, right? Again, part of your development and your analytical skills is really to think outside the box, right? And think like, how would I solve this particular challenge? And sometimes it's a technology, sometimes it's multiple technologies, sometimes it's, a much simpler answer, right? Sometimes it's process. So really focus and train your brain to always constantly think improvement, think, how do I need to do this differently? And I think I drive my husband mad sometimes because I was like, even at home, right? I was like, oh, how can we do this differently? Like, why is this thing always sitting over here? And should we put this over somewhere else? And what would that look like? So it's even small things that, in your personal life, but always ask that question, right? Like, how can I do this differently? And even asking that question will then automatically train your brain to be able to start to think like, have I explored all the options? Like, how would I go about doing this? So that would be my advice, and that's what I do. So I'm giving you the advice that I take.
That's great. And that's actually the reason I married a data scientist. So having those kind of experiences at home is a little bit easier. And for those of you that haven't met my wife, Amanda, she actually was on a fireside chat a couple of episodes again, and you can see that recording on the IT events page. So thank you, Kamal. At this point, I'd love to jump over and answer some of the student and alumni and friends questions that have actually come in. And Jory, who's our operations manager here in the data analytics department, is going to tee that off. Jory, do we have some questions for Kamal?
We have some fantastic questions. One of them is from someone who's looking at possibly going to get their bachelor's degree in data analytics. They have an extensive years of experience working in data and BI. Is going for the bachelor's degree in data analytics something that you would support? And could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask a couple of clarifying questions? So this person already has been working in the BI and analytics space for 25 years, I think they said, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And what you're thinking about is really solidifying sort of the credential with taking on a bachelor's degree and whatever other degrees you're going to take, correct?
That's what it looks like.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so it's a rock and a hard place, right? I think there would be, so I'll give you kind of what the segments of answers will be, and then I can also say, hey, here's what I think. And please do not always follow my advice because, you have to really think through and make that decision for yourself. But um, there, if you have extensive experience and have done this, over many, many years, um, it all depends on the type of role that you're thinking about. Certain types of roles will automatically just say, hey, you have to have a degree, right? And there's also a lot of pros and cons to that. It's like, okay, well, just, your extensive experience should counteract the fact, whether it's a degree or not. Then there's the other side of things, right? Which is, hey, having a degree actually teaches you many, many things, right? That you may not actually be able to learn on the job, right? So it has discipline, it has these conversations that we're having, it has methodology, right, with every course that you're taking. And sometimes going through that discipline actually really triggers many, many different ways of how you can think about a particular problem and add value. So I don't know that I would say go for it or don't go for it, because I think those are decisions that you would have to make based on what you're trying to achieve. But I always say, if there's a particular role that you're trying to go after and that, that profile of the role constantly asks for that, right? It's always helpful to make sure that you're having that particular credential or degree, right? And then this is also just constant learning and growth, right? So it's important to keep learning those things, whether you're in a formal degree and then you're going to do some courses after, et cetera, et cetera. I still take a ton of courses primarily because that's how I also learn, right? And it gives me a break from actually working all the time as well. So that's the best way I can answer that question.
I could add one thing to that too, and that was a great answer. I think when this student is thinking about maximizing the experience in that program, given that you want to find different offerings throughout the course of that degree program that you can really double down on. So if there's a particular area that you haven't had much practical hands-on experience with, double down on it. Talk with the instructor, talk with the faculty, get some extra work in that area, have those conversations, see if they could introduce you to some folks that could really push you in that area. Take advantage, as Kamal said, of events like this, being able to tutor and mentor other folks that may be in the program. You can really make a lot of these experiences your own to really maximize what you're getting out of it, and then being able to get through what you already know as quickly as you can, which is one of the benefits of a competency-based program like WGU.
No, I love it. Yeah. I'm actually like, as I was talking to Joe, I was like, Joe, what kind of programs do you have? Can I teach some stuff, or can
Yes,
I
please.
like, can
Yes,
I
please.
take some stuff?
I think HR is listening to this right now,
Oh,
Kamal.
goodness.
So,
Okay, I better
yeah.
stop then.
Yeah. What else do we have, Jory?
Well, we have other types of students, those who have experience, but they have the educational experience. What is your recommendation for those new graduates to gain experience? Because a lot of the job postings say they need experience.
Yeah, great question. So here's what I would say. I think most organizations will have internship programs, right? So start to make those connections and those networks to be able to say, hey, can I do a particular internship? Hopefully you're already trying to maximize, right, on those in terms of, can I do small scale internships in a particular organization if you're interested? The other thing that organizations have, so as you're like coming into the particular role, right, there are different ways to get experience. So when I started my career, right, we all start somewhere. I was doing a lot of different types of analysis, right? I was working for a construction company at one point, and so I think you don't put sort of barriers upon yourself, like I want to be in this industry and that's the only industry I'll go in and so forth, right? I think at this stage, the goal is to get experience, right, in any sort of way, shape, or form. The other sort of advice I would give is there are lots of organizations that actually are looking for people to volunteer their time, which can count as experience, towards a particular problem or skill set. So Patagonia is a great example. And if you go to Patagonia, they have a page where they're always looking for folks with different skills to be able to contribute towards a particular initiative or project, right? And so that is experience. That's true experience. So try to gather up those types of organizations and those types of different sort of places and ways. Not-for-profits are always looking for folks, right? Because they're always short on staff or money or whatever have you. So those are the ways that you can actually build up your own experience, and then that goes on your resume, right? So that when you're applying to different roles, it's not like, well, I have no experience. No, that is experience, right? And that counts. I hope that helped. You can give me a thumbs up or something.
I'll give you a thumbs up. I thought that was good. I was also thinking when you said pro bono, Informs, the organization Informs, also offers pro bono work as well in the analytics space too. And you can actually fill out an application and create a profile on the Informs website, and they'll match you to different nonprofits that are looking for folks that have skills in data analytics, etc.
Yeah. Remember, this is your career, right? So I say I'm fierce, even though, yeah, I at some points, like I have little knots in my tummy as well. But you have to be fierce in terms of going after what you're looking for, right? And there are different ways to get at it. We just gave you a whole bunch of recipes, but talk to different people, get some folks, who can mentor you and give you thoughts, ideas, avenues. They exist.
All right, another question is, what does a portfolio consist of?
What does a portfolio consist of?
I think I think that question came in.
Near the beginning.
So James, I know you asked that question. If you could go into the chat and just clarify by what you meant by portfolio, we can come back to your question.
Absolutely. So another question is, do you have any books or resources or anything in general that you specifically love as in related to data analytics?
The list is ginormous. So what I will do is I'll work with Joe to create or recommend a little sort of sort of reading list, I'll call it. I tend to read a lot on different blogs. I do a lot in the Harvard Business Review because they always have very interesting ways in terms of how it is that they look at data and problems. But there is so much out there that it would be impossible for me to say, okay, here, there's all kinds of top 10, analytics books, and then there's top 10 machine learning books and data science books. Um, I think my advice would be get curious about a particular topic, right? And really just kind of build your search engine from there. And I'll work with Joe to kind of create a little recommendation list of the books that I've read that have really helped and influenced, me.
I'm already thinking book club, and we can call it Kamal's Island Challenge.
I love it. Get off the island, hopefully
See,
successfully.
that's my marketing background. That's coming back. So it's yeah. Any other questions, Jory?
Yes, we have one asking about the PMP certification and how it relates to the data analyst scientist skill set.
Sure. The PMP is sort of your project management skill set, right? I think oftentimes the comparable there is you would think about roles that are product owner oriented, right? Or product management oriented. I think it all depends on what type of an area or arena that you're trying to go into, right? So if your goal is to be much more technology focused, right? You want to be in the analytics, you want to be in the thick of it, you want to be hands-on, or you're thinking about decision intelligence, data science, et cetera. Those are all fields where I think I'm not sure like a project management type degree is really the right approach, right? But again, no degree, you're always going to learn something from what you do, right? So I never say never. But generally, those have very different sort of personas, and the track and the pathway is very different to how to become successful. I think if you're really thinking about product ownership and more sort of the person that I described, right, that's really interfacing with the business and interfacing with the team, right? It's always great to have those organizational skills, but most organizations are doing more agile now. So really understanding sort of whether you're doing Scrum or some of those methodologies and principles, but the mindset, right? Because agile is not about like checkbox, did I do this or not? So focusing on those agile principles and building your mindset in terms of how to think about products, how to think about problems, I think that's more value add. But again, I think all depends on the track that you're and the type of role that you're wanting to do for the future. Joe, anything else you would add?
Yeah, the PMP is an interesting one, and I love the comments that you said. When you think about the data product owner, for example, that product management role that you were describing, if you're getting to a more senior level of that role, something like a PMP may make sense depending on the organization that you're within. PMP is also it's a gold standard certification that requires documented hours of work. Kind of like when you start thinking about going for different belts within Six Sigma, the higher up you go, the more difficult it's going to get, all the way to the black belt that you have, Kamal, that is the absolute gold standard of Six Sigma. I think there are ways that you can step into that. So if you want to be on an analytics team owning different products, analytic products within the organization, CompTIA's Project Plus is a way to start. You can look at some Agile and Scrum trainings, as Kamal mentioned, and really start to build your portfolio around what are the different ways that I can successfully manage these projects. And then as your career is progressing, if you see an opportunity where PMP makes sense, great. It makes sense for that particular path that you're on. Though I will tell you, many students coming out of universities that try to go after PMP right out of the gate, they may not know exactly how they're going to use it or be ready at that point in their career for it.
No, great advice.
Jory, I think we have time for one last question if there's another one out there.
Sure. What are some common pitfalls to avoid when starting out in the data science industries without previous experience, or any tips to get a head start?
Ooh, common pitfalls starting out in the data science space.
Can I say one right off the tip of my tongue?
Sure. Psycho, how do I say
Don't.
some of these without being too direct? So go for it.
Most data is wrong or misleading. I think a lot of folks come into roles and they assume that everything that they're receiving is accurate and complete. You need to get that out of your mind. In a university setting, a lot of times the assignments that you're getting, unless it's particularly teaching you about cleaning data and so forth, may be complete and there are actually patterns within the data set that make sense and everything's documented. For most companies, 90% of the time that's not going to be the case. And I think that's one of the biggest things that hit people in the face when they first go into corporate America is they realize what happened to all those nice data sets that I saw at university.
They don't exist. So, oh, that's a really good one. I think the other one would be, some of these disciplines, are tricky, data science especially. It's like data scientists have different variations and gradations, I'll call it, right? So, get display growth mindset, right? Don't go in with a know-it-all sort of game plan. And even within data science, there are disciplines, right? Some are really good at Gen AI, some are really good at, different types of data science. So, and different algorithms, right? Because you may not even have the opportunity to utilize all different types of algorithms in your lifetime. So my advice would be kind of go in with certainly a learning mindset, but also, as you're trying to nail down the job that you're, trying to get at, be really transparent and open. Like, look, here are the areas where I've really excelled at, and I've done quite a bit of work, and here are the areas where I'm working on, and this is how I'm working on these types of things, right? So that would be it. And then other pitfalls is, I think Joe hit a really good one. There is no clean data, I swear. There's some statistic that like 85% of our time is spent cleaning data. So my mission here is to bring that down. That would be my aspiration.
60%. Right.
I feel like the number changes depending on who you talk to, I think. So, yeah. So, yeah, I'm trying to think through other pitfalls, right? Mindset.
Yeah. I have one more, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of students tend to come out of programs thinking that you will build one or more models a week. Well, in reality, if you think back to what Kamal was talking about the processes and the partnership and the stories and the benefits, these are large transformations a lot of the time. And depending on the team that you're on, you may be working on one or two algorithms a year, depending on what your company is doing and what the maturity curve that they're on is. So I think, don't be discouraged if you're not hard coding a random forest or creating new generative AI every single week. There's a lot that you need to do to actually bring your model to life. There's a DevOps component, there's a change management component, there's a training component, there's then nurturing and taking care of that model over time. You know, it's a baby that's going to grow up and go to high school and go to college. Maybe eventually it retires. There's a whole life cycle that comes with a lot of that. And I find that, at least when I was at Dell anyways, a lot of folks that would come in brand new, not having worked in the experience, were kind of caught off guard by the fact that you may not be building a net new model or doing a net new analysis every week or every day.
I thought of a great one actually while you were talking, which is don't expect that the path to production of a particular model that you're building is nice and smooth and easy. Does not exist, right? You could have the best MLOps pipeline, right? So again, when you're in these, ask questions, right? How do you do your model deployment, right? What does that look like? What does your MLOps pipeline look like, right? And that huge pitfall, people think, oh, well, I built this model, I put it to production, I got results. In the true sense of corporate America, we have so many different technologies. We have tech debt, we have technologies that may be antiquated that are still running in production, and your model has to navigate all of these things, right, to truly make it to true production. So huge pitfall that you think you're going to have an amazing deployment experience and generally not.
Well, you know what? The good thing is, and there's two things that I'm thinking. One, you know, we have programs like we have here at WGU to get you ready for that. And these programs are being built by teams that have that experience, that know what those pitfalls are. And then the second thing is there are leaders out there like Kamal that you're going to get to work for who understand these things, who are passionate, who are inspirational, and hopefully are on your bucket list to be able to work for somebody like her. So Kamal, I know we're out of time and I would love to continue this conversation so much. But I will be respectful of the fact that we're at the hour here. So thank you very much for coming on, Kamal Disto, who is the VP of Data Analytics, Platforms, and Data Science at Toyota Motor Corporation. And for everyone who's listening, episode 10 of the Fireside Chat is coming in mid-August. And we will be joined with Kristen Keir, who is a LinkedIn top voice and a developer advocate and the founder of Data Moves Me. So look for that coming up. You can see that on the IT events page with the dates. Kamal, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Honored and privileged, and thank you all for listening, and definitely reach out if I can help in any way, if you have questions, etc. So Joe, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.